All right. I believe we're live. So, turns out I am doing a stream before the new year. Definitely before Christmas. I'm probably going to do another one, at least one before before the new year. I might do a few, but this one will probably be short since I need to have dinner eventually. But I just wanted to talk about the hey Nate. I always wonder what you which who you're talking about when you write those words in all caps, as if your caps lock key is broken. I always wondered, and this seems to be routine, not just on apologetics channels, but uh, most YouTube channels, most heavily or even moderately trafficked YouTube channels have this policy. I don't have this policy because people don't. Uh, well, I don't have that many viewers, so I don't have that many people in chat, so that would necessitate this. But this this ban on using all caps repeatedly. I know some people, some channels enforce it very stringently. They Anyone who uses all caps is automatically get handed a timeout. Others let it lapse. If you're not spamming the same message repeatedly, then they'll pretty much let it slide. But I think most channels of some consequence, they enforce that policy. Like, you're not allowed to just repeatedly unless you have a channel where the person operating it just doesn't really care what goes on in the live chats. Like, unless there's a spam attack, there's some sort of the equivalent of a DDoS attack, they're not going to pay any attention, so they basically let it slide. But for the most part, um most of these channels are going to impose some sort of restrictions on what you can do vis-a-vis caps, all caps, which I can understand to a certain extent. I mean, I get tired of that sometimes, but I think some mods go overboard. I saw this on the Beauty and the Beta podcast. Their streams, they have certain mods that will just go nuts if you start posting in caps, and they'll just hand out timeouts willy nilly. They'll threaten to boot you from the channel altogether. It's kind of wild. Yeah, it's weird. It really goes to, sometimes it's kind of like that maxim by Lord Acton: power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'm reading a Thomas DiLorenzo book called Hamilton's Curse. It's a critical biography of Alexander Hamilton. It's sort of a counterweight to the Ron Chernow hagiography, that 700-page hagiography of Alexander Hamilton, which I read. I think I read maybe 600 pages of that. I read most of the book. It was the basis, or one of the bases, believe it or not, for Lin-Manuel Miranda's ridiculous hip hop musical based on the life of Alexander Hamilton. Hi, David. And DiLorenzo actually invokes that phrase when he's talking about Hamilton. The Lord Acton's statement: "Absolute power corrupts absolutely." And I think that happens sometimes to mods. No one on this channel, of course, but sometimes they let the power get to their heads, and it's really ridiculous when you think of the power. Like, even if you're the mod of hey, Hey, Mr. Miller. Um, Hi, Tower Time. Yeah, it's really ridiculous when you even conceive of that as a way of wielding power. Like you have, like I said, even if it's a very popular channel where you have more responsibility than on a channel like this, it's kind of ridiculous to let that let that go to your head so much that you begin to exercise the power as if you're some sort of tin horn dictator. Like you're the mod at uh you know Act 17 Apologetics or Sierra or this channel. Like, I mean, no one's. I don't know. I think that that's one of the reasons no one goes too crazy here is because the power is so dispersed. It's kind of like that that French philosopher Montesquieu, whose ideas were the basis for the separation of powers in the U.S. government. This idea that you need to disperse the. If there were only a few mods, I would be concerned. But since there are so many, I don't think any individual mod can be that corrupted. But then again, man is sinful, so you never know. You never know. Oh yeah, I don't. It's funny. I don't remember that one. Although Kids in the Hall was a very good series. It was much better in terms of Lorne Michael projects. It was much better than Saturday Night Live for most of its history. Although it had a much shorter run. But some of the comedians there were and writers were hilarious. Like Dave Foley, who you might remember, he was on News Radio along with Joe Rogan before Rogan became a podcasting colossus. he was he was on News Radio with him and with the late great Phil Hartman. I wasn't a fan of News Radio, to be honest, but Kids in the Hall I enjoyed. I was a fan of Phil Hartman and uh Joe Rogan I actually started to like later on when he became a podcast. I did not like the Fear Factor MMA announcer stand-up comedian version of Joe Rogan, but as a podcast host, he's pretty competent for the most part. I mean, you have those episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience, and I know people love these, the ones with Alex Jones, but I mean, they are very entertaining, but like, I don't know if I have the patience to sit through a 3 hour long podcast with anyone, no matter how entertaining they are. I mean, I guess there are certain figures that could be that are worth sitting through 3 hours of podcasting, though. But I think that's my limit. Anyway, I wanted to talk briefly about the CV word. I don't know if you can use the actual name of what we're discussing on YouTube any longer, but apparently there's been a spike in cases in Sweden, which is which has prompted all of the people that have instituted yeah, the JRE Clips channel is what I usually watch. I don't bother because I get notifications from the main channel too, but I'm usually not going to sit through a 2.5 hour long or 3.5 hour long podcast, no matter how fascinating. I mean, he just interviewed I think he I forget who it was. He interviewed someone from NASA or a an astronomer. I don't recall, but like he does have interesting guests um most of the time. Other times it's just some washed up has been comedian that he that he was on the road with for 15 years that he decided to invite because he has a Netflix special. So yeah, it varies, but for the most part, there's some interesting uh, morsels of information there. Yeah, it's cold now, believe it or not. I mean, that's why I'm wearing a hooded sweatshirt, also known as a hoodie, and this sweater which has three pockets. It's very useful. But yeah, there's supposed to be a snowstorm beginning tomorrow night, which is why. So they're closing. They've already closed all. Oh, thanks, Lisa. They've already closed all indoor dining, which for some reason, despite having a lower per capita positive rate and having um despite being despite having more people and the economy being more significant, uh Long Island had indoor dining for months before it was finally decided to test the waters and allow limited capacity in New York City. So they reopened indoor dining in New York City, and it lasted for uh it lasted it was a little blip, and now they're shutting it down again, and they're going to shut down outdoor dining because of the imminent blizzard, which is supposed to drop anywhere from a half a foot to a foot of snow on New York City and outlying areas, so the suburbs, uh, places like Westchester and Rockland, and probably northern New Jersey. I'm guessing. I haven't looked at the forecast, but it's supposed to snow. Um, then again, it could take a detour. I mean, this is why these climatological models are so ridiculous when they're trying to forecast what the global temperature is going to be or the sea levels, 20 years from now. And it's less than 36 hours away from a gigantic snowstorm, and they still don't know where it's going to land or how impactful it's going to be in New York City. Like they say it's going to be a half a foot or a foot, but if it takes a different course, we could get 2 inches. So send you the snow. Yeah. I mean, I wish I could. I mean, no one in me thing is this is making New York City even more intolerable than it usually is. And I can't I can't even begin to recount the number of friends I have who've left the city. A few of them have moved upstate, but most have just left entirely. They've relocated to Texas. I have a bunch of friends who have been living in New Hampshire for years. A couple have moved to Florida. I think there were one or two that moved to California but have returned because California is even worse than New York in some respects. So that was a failed experiment. But yeah, most of them have left. Some of them have left from North Carolina, I think. One of them, I think, is living in Indiana now. All over the place, but mostly Texas. Um, if you were curious. Yeah, there's a mass exodus. They I think this was I forget if this was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but for the first time since the 1970s, in other words, since the nadir of the modern trough of New York City, basically when we were literally bankrupt and the mayor had to beg the federal government to bail New York City out. So for the first time since that era, New York City lost population, uh, and people don't realize how rare that is for a place like New York City le- to actually be losing population, because just the number uh, of internal um, people moving there internally from other parts of the country is enormous. Let alone the number of immigrants, the people that come here every year that just remain here. I worked briefly for a moving company in Brooklyn, and when I found out the number of registered moving companies, I was astonished. Oh, hi, Alejandro. Now, these were moving companies that actually took the time to go through all of the regulatory rigmarole to, they had insurance, their drivers had insurance, they paid taxes. Um, they were like licensed, they were legit, at least on the surface, they were legitimate moving companies, which was one of the moving, um, and my moving company was one of those. And when I found out how many of them there were in New York City alone, I was flabbergasted. But yeah, I mean, eventually I was let go because there wasn't as much work. It was a downtime, and they had overhired the number of they had overhired sales consultants. But even so, if it had if instead of having 4 or 5, they'd only had 2, they would have been comfortable working the year round. That's how many people move into and out of New York City. But the fact is, more people are now moving out than are moving in, and it's it's very understandable why, the reasons why, when you actually stop to think about it. I mean, there are very few things that make New York City appealing, particularly to people who have a lot of liquidity in their assets and can relocate, where they don't need to be in New York City for financial reasons, for business purposes. Hi, Christine. Um, there are very few things that make it appealing for someone with the means to operate elsewhere to remain here. Oh, Merry Christmas. Uh, it never snows in New York City in Christmas, so that's one thing you don't have to we don't have to worry about. Uh, but yeah, for people who can just move their assets somewhere, who can not work here, it's there are very few things that make it appealing to live in New York City, and those few things, COVID has basically, not COVID itself, but the political reaction to it by our public officials, by the people in power, the political reaction to that has eliminated all of those things, all of those very few things that make it worth putting up with the um the uh the dirt and garbage and congestion and population density and high the confiscatory tax rates, the uh, and the crime, the fact New York City, the people who are reliant on a new productive tax base, the people who are reliant on that are making it more difficult to extract wealth. In other words, they're pushing the people that are most essential away, pushing them out of New York. And even Governor Meatball admitted as much in one of his press conferences. Like he said, they're these people are leaving, and it's obvious why they're leaving. We have, and it's just going to get progressively worse. I mean, it's not like the people being elected who are going to be elected subsequent to Andrew Cuomo or Bill de Blasio are going to be better than these people. And these people are wretched. They've ruined New York City and New York State respectively. So imagine their successors being worse than they are, and that's a reality that people are going to have to accept. Oh yeah, I heard about the Yang thing. I think that's one of the reasons he's monkeying around in the Georgia Senate races. Apparently, I mean, at least that's what my friends say. I haven't really been paying too much attention to that, but he's apparently trying to pull a Bloomberg down in Georgia. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Yang ran, if he did run. So you're going to have someone promising to give people checks out of the public treasury. So I'm sure that'll be appealing to a certain percentage of New Yorkers. And in terms of his ethnic identity, the fact that you have an Asian running for mayor, I think John Liu, who was the corrupt uh, controller, ran for mayor as well. So I mean, I'm sure that will appeal. His ethnic identity will be appealing to Asians who haven't had many public officials representing them in New York City. Um, it it it. it it's funny. There haven't been that many. I mean, there are Asian elected officials in places like Flushing, Queens. I think they finally elected a far left city councilwoman, Margaret Shin, in Chinatown, which didn't occur until sometime after the 20th century. I think like because of the way the the way political districts are gerrymandered in order to consolidate power for certain people. I think Chinatown for a long time didn't actually have a representative who was Chinese. But I could see Yang being appealing just because of that, and because of the fact that he wants to hand people free money. But the people outside of Yang who are going to be running are probably going to be even worse. To be to be honest, like there's no upside to the future of New York City. Like I think Scott Stringer is going to be running, and he's kind of an archetypal Upper West Side liberal career politician. I'm not sure, but Jumaane Williams, who's sort of the Black Lives Matter candidate, he might be running as well. Again, I'm not a political prognosticator, particularly with local politics, but I think yeah, none of those surprise me. I think Max Rose, who was a Bernie Sanders supporter, is running or contemplating running after getting shellacked in his reelection bid over here in the what is it, the 13th? I don't even know which district it is. I think it's the 13th or the 11th, but it's predominantly Staten Island and part of Brooklyn. That might, I mean, I conceivably he could craft an appealing campaign because, I mean, he was able to get elected in Staten Island as a Democrat, which I think hadn't happened in over 3 decades. So it's conceivable that he's sort of, even though his philosophy is repellent, he does have a very folksy sort of New York uh, charm, I guess. In that would appeal to that would be marketable. Um, hey JV, hi Irene. Are they still counting votes? Yeah. Well, actually, what happened there is that the Republican, a federal judge allowed them to count a whole slew of votes after the Republican was winning, which isn't surprising. Um, to go back to the De Lorenzo book, it's kind of interesting because the chapter I just read was about Alexander Hamilton's empowerment of the judiciary, and he achieved that through John Marshall, the Supreme Court justice, who was was who I a person who idolized Hamilton. So the whole concept of judicial review stems from Alexander Hamilton's philosophy. And one of the things that he tried to do was to basically stack the court as the departing Federalist administration under John Adams tried to stack the court with all of these midnight judges. They wound up losing that particular gambit, but in Marbury versus not Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch, they they established the idea. John Marshall established the idea of judicial review, which set in motion the next 2 centuries. Although it was actually pretty limited up until the 1960s, but the next 2 centuries of judges just accumulating more and more power to determine what the Constitution says, which isn't really a constitutional concept itself. And so, like, what judges are doing now, particularly involving themselves in the political sphere, does not surprise me, and it shouldn't surprise people who followed the progression of the courts. The De Lorenzo book is actually pretty interesting because it demolishes a lot of the myths surrounding Alexander Hamilton and his ambition. It's called Hamilton's Curse for those of you who are curious. I don't know. It would be interesting if he does run. I could conceivably see him running, particularly if Biden is forced to resign or leave because of health problems. I could definitely see him running against Kamala or Kamala, however you pronounce it. I could definitely see him doing that, or he could support Mike Pence or Tom Cotton. I think those two would be the best situated to carry on the Trump legacy or the Trump banner. So it's conceivable that he could just step into the shadows and quietly support one of them. Yeah, I did a couple of videos on her, which you can find. Um, one that was eerily prescient. I didn't predict her becoming Joe Biden's running mate, but I think I said something along the lines of, she is like her candidacy, something along the lines of her candidacy is not going to be successful as in the primary, but she has the sort of biography that would be very, very appealing in the future. Like I'm paraphrasing, but I don't know. You could go back and check the Kamala Harris videos to see what I said about her. I think this was when she was still when the media was still trying to gas her up as a potential president, which it turns out maybe they were right because if Joe Biden takes another slip, she's already measuring drapes for the Oval Office. Was it the West Wing? Indonesian, which Indonesians or Indonesian? Um, yeah, I think he could probably win too. Um, anyway, I think I was going to talk about Sweden on this stream, but like like most of my live streams, the original plan is quickly subsumed by other topics. It's like that Mike Tyson quote: "Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face or you get punched in the mouth." I forget how it goes, but it's one of my favorite Mike Tyson quotes. I mean, it sounds it sounds kind of silly, but it make it sort of makes sense when you analyze it. Like the point is, everyone has this idea or philosophy of what they're going to do until they're actually confronted by reality, and then they have to adapt. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I should probably some yeah, the people there's like a group chat that people it's one of those annoying things if it's an app on your phone, like you get whenever anyone responds to anyone for any reason, you get a notification, so it's like constantly buzzing for how 10 hours or so until everyone goes to sleep. uh it's weird. There's If you go down to the main strip over here, there's a lot of Christmas decorations in the shops, but there's not uh I don't know how to describe it. It's very, very interesting. Something I always liked was the Macy's in Herald Square. They have and it's illuminated in lights, but they have this giant word which says believe, and I think there's an exclamation point or something, but it just says believe, and it's really powerful, especially coming from something you kind of just associate with mindless consumerism. It's like you don't um you don't really think of Macy's when you think about the actual purpose or the reason behind Christmas, but it's kind of cool. I like to take pictures of that when I'm around Herald Square around this time of year. I think it's there for all of through December. Yeah, gotta love group chats. I don't think you have to if you don't like your phone buzzing constantly, then uh was yeah. I didn't hear about the death penalty. I know um there's some I think they're still carrying out. I mean, there are a lot of states that have suspended executions. It's funny. Someone was talking about this, and I don't remember who it was or where I saw it, but someone said that lethal injection is kind of the quintessential liberal solution to it. It was intended to make the state killing someone more humane or more superficially acceptable, I guess, to ease their pain, and just makes the process longer and more painful. And like, you wonder why this would be even this would even be debated. If you're going to execute someone, what's there? I mean, the purpose of the Eighth Amendment wasn't to forbid capital punishment. It Cruel and unusual punishment doesn't mean putting someone convicted of capital crimes to death, because if it did, then there wouldn't have been executions during the Revolutionary War up through the convening of the Constitutional Congress, and then subsequent to that throughout early American history. Like, there were people being executed throughout this period, from the time of America's founding and the revolt against the revolt by the 13 colonies, all the way up through the establishment of the U.S. Like, none of the framers of the Constitution considered capital punishment per se to be unconstitutional or illegal. So it's basically, again, it's judges reading something into the text that wasn't there. And this is one of the things, not to harp on this Thomas DiLorenzo book, but this is something that he also brings up: the idea of the judiciary. I'm sorry, the judiciary manipulating, kind of creating this living document. This was something that Alexander Hamilton wanted the Constitution to be. People don't realize this, but he walked away very dissatisfied with the way the Constitution was drafted. And he said, I forget the phrase that he used, but he described it as just he basically described it as useless and ineffectual. And the only way it could become effective is if judges and the government read more powers into it than existed inherently in the document. So this idea that you needed to graft powers onto the document where none existed. So using things like the General Welfare Clause, which has basically become a catch-all for any federal government program, and encroachment upon states' rights or individual liberties, or the Necessary and Proper Clause, or this idea of implied powers. These are all just ways of enlarging the purview of the federal government and giving it powers that it's not constitutionally, that aren't constitutionally delegated to it to begin with. Anyway, that's, again, this is a bit of a tangent, but anyway, I think that's it. Like I said, I might do one or two more of these, depending. Yeah, YouTube is deleting comments sometimes. I mean, sometimes, not very often here. I can't remember the last time I had to do it here. I've done it once or twice, hide comments, but usually, like, if you see comments being deleted, that might actually be YouTube, because they're starting to do that in the chats, the live chats, which is disconcerting. But I've seen that a couple of times during David's live streams, which I mod. Like, YouTube will actually just delete comments, and usually it's not the type of comments that you would consider um delete worthy. Let's just put it that way. No, no, no. That's just there was a rap song. I don't even remember who did it, but there was a rap song years ago, and the chorus was I got that East Coast Connect, West Coast Connect, Dirty South Connect, so show some respect. But 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 I just thought it was I thought it was a useful name to use, because I still live on the East Coast, so it's until till I relocate. Um, it's 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 useful. It's descriptive, at least. Anyway, uh, that I use mostly my real name for social media, for YouTube, of course, and Twitter. And I think Instagram is the only social media where I use a handle, an online pseudonym. Uh, no, I don't, I don't think that's it, but I could be wrong. I haven't really listened to rap music. I haven't been an avid hip hop music listener since I was in junior high school. If we're gonna be honest here, and I was watching Video Music Box, but like I haven't really listened to rap music that intently since then. I mean, I have a vague familiarity with rap, like, but usually when I hear about it now, it's someone like Cardi B who is. I mean, I'll listen to something, one of her songs, out of curiosity, and then just be so it'll be so abhorrent that I like. I mean, like, I can't understand how some of these people are actually given me recording contracts, to be honest, because um you have to have some talent. You have to have some musical talent to be a musician, or at least that used to be the notion. But now it seems that's gone completely out the window. If you're notorious for something, if you've attracted, I guess, an Instagram following, you can break into the recording industry. It's very bizarre. Uh, yeah, and yeah, I don't listen to this. Like I said, this was a song recorded, probably over a decade ago. I don't even remember the DJ Hurricane. That could be it. Yeah, it's a number of rappers. I think it was like it was like, it wasn't just one rapper. It's one of these things where you have like four or five four or five rappers, or stables of rappers, like chiming in on each verse. But like, I thought it was a good handle, East Coast Connect. So uh at least, again, at least as long as I'm living on the East Coast, I might change it when I yeah, yeah, it was 20 years ago. I think the last new, quote unquote, new rap artist I followed was Outkast, and they when did they start? In the late 90s, so, or mid 90s. So yeah, it's been a while. Anyway, now that we're kind of drifting, and it's almost 45 minutes. I think I will say goodbye to everyone. Christine, Alejandro, GW, Chicago, Tower Time, Irene, David, Nate, if he's still lurking, Chris. I think I already said Christine. But everyone, thanks for coming. Like I said, feel free to share. I don't know how many people want to watch a 45-minute long video of me just rambling about random topics. But anyway, if I don't make another video before Christmas, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all.